Hi, third graders. I'm really excited to be here with you today to read chapters 10 and 11 of our Read Aloud Rump by Lisel Shurtliff. I hope that you guys are still enjoying the story after something kind of sad happened last time. Rump's grandmother became ill and she passed away at the end of chapter 9. At the end of chapter 9. So some other things that happened in chapter 8 and chapter 9 were that the miller gave Rump a very bad bargain for all of his gold. Rump thought he should have gotten so much more, and all he got was 10 pounds of flour, and so he is a little bit upset about that. So today, chapter 10 begins, and it's called Unfair Bargains. Here we go. The bell chimed, and the gnomes ran through the village, shouting, "Elsbeth, grandmother of Rump, has gone the way of all the earth." The gnomes announced death as they did anything else, with squeaking excitement. And the morning I despised the pudgy, waddling creatures more than ever. I went outside and threw snowballs at every gnome that passed. I missed them all. If there was ever a time to cry, it was this, but I couldn't. Everything inside me felt shriveled up and hollow, like a dead tree. I didn't cry when I saw that Gran would not wake. I didn't cry when they came and covered her with her quilt and took her away. I didn't cry when she was lowered into the hard frozen earth. I didn't cry when Red's mother touched my shoulder and placed in my arms a loaf of still warm bread. When I came home, the cottage looked like a chicken coop attacked by a fox. Feathers and bones everywhere. Oats and flour sprinkled across the floor. Straw and dirt, pots and dishes and rags. Buckets of melted snow leaked on the ground, creating little muddy rivers. It looked like I felt, torn to shreds. Gran's bed was empty, the indents of her small body still pressed into the mattress. That's when I cried. I cried real snort-running, chest-heaving cries until it was all drained out, and I was empty, empty, empty. Gran was gone. She would never greet me with a rhyme or comfort me when I felt small. She would never sit by the fire and tell me stories. I sat in the middle of the mess. I was still holding the loaf of bread Red's mother had given me. Mindlessly, I tore chunks off and ate, swallowing huge pieces before I chewed. I ate and ate and ate. I ate the entire loaf, and still I was empty, empty, empty. The spinning wheel sat motionless by the snuffed-out fire. The wheel felt like a giant eye looming over me. I went to my bed and ripped open my mattress, letting the gold spill out onto the floor. It glimmered with cruel coldness. I hated that gold. I wanted nothing to do with it. I gathered every last skein inside my blanket and hauled it to the mill. This time the miller was waiting for me. "Such a sad time for you," he said with false sympathy. "But it seems that good fortune has befallen you in other ways." His eyes narrowed on my heavy bundle. I flung it down at his feet and let the gold spill all over his doorstep. The miller jumped back and then smiled. My, you have been busy." "What will you give me?" I asked. "Here." He handed me a small sack of potatoes, maybe 5 pounds. "Food is always more expensive in the winter. But keep up the hard work. I will always give you a fair bargain." I stared at the miller, seething. That means really mad. I wanted to say he was a lying, cheating, despicable, heartless villain. I wanted to throw the potatoes in his fat face and take my gold back. But my jaw was clamped shut and my arms were fastened tight around the bag. The miller bent down and scooped up the gold. Then he shut the door in my speechless face. This wasn't magic. It was a curse. I could feel it wrapping around me fast now, tightening its coils. I thought I wouldn't spin again, but eventually my food ran out. I had killed the last hen, and milk was not giving enough milk to quench thirst, let alone live on. It was pointless to look for gold in the mines. Even if I found some, I knew the miller would still give me nothing. He wanted my gold. So as time wore on, I was forced to spin more. I gathered bits of straw from the floor and the hen's nest outside, but all that got me was some shriveled turnips and onions. When the last turnip was gone, I tore open Gran's mattress and started spinning the straw inside. I spun Gran's entire straw mattress into gold. At first, I cried as I did it. I was betraying Gran and spinning her memory away all at once. But then I stopped crying. I stopped worrying that anything bad would happen, and I stopped hoping that anything good would happen. I think I had stopped feeling anything at all. I just spun. For 4 months, I spun and traded the gold to the miller. The trade was never fair, but I never argued. Once, I traded 10 skeins of gold for a small sack of flour and some rotten carrots. Soon, I found I didn't care how fair the bargains were. Trading the gold became more of a habit than a need. I no longer went to the mines. I never even went outside unless I was going to the mill, but no one seemed to notice or care, except Red. She visited me sometimes, though we said very little. Once in a while, she brought a loaf of bread from her mother. That's the only time I felt anything. It's hard not to feel guilty when starving people bring you food. I thought I would just live that way for the rest of my life, spinning gold and never getting rich, eating food and never getting full, or tall, or smart, or kind, or anything at all. Maybe it would have stayed that way forever if a certain visitor had not come to the mountain in search of a certain kind of gold. Chapter 11, King Barf. So remember, the king actually has a super fancy long name, but Rump shortens it down and calls him King Barf. Okay, let's see. As winter melted away, the creatures of the mountain began to emerge from their long slumber. I woke one morning to a pixie on my nose. It seemed the pixies had nested in my chimney, and now they were waking. The whole cottage had become one big swarming pixie nest. I tried to swat them away from the tangles of gold all over the floor, but they shrieked and bit me. I ran outside. The air was still chilly, but at least I could breathe without my tongue freezing. Then I noticed something strange. The villagers should have been at work in the mines by now. But instead, everyone was gathering in the village square. The crowds were just visible from my cottage, down the street in front of the mill. And it seemed the whole village was there, chattering and buzzing, as excited as the pixies inside. If Red walking with her mother, I found Red walking with her mother towards the square. "What's going on?" I asked. "Mountain pass is open," she said. "So?" She pointed down the mountain. "Someone's coming up." A big open sound rang through the air, like the village bell, but deeper and longer. It sounded again and again, with a regular rhythm. "It's a royal procession," said a woman. "A what? What for?" The most royal visitor we ever received was a tax collector, and he never brought a procession. I looked down the road, winding up the mountain, and saw the most amazing sight. 12 horses, 2 dozens, and not little horses from the mountain, but big war horses from the kingdom. And on those horses were soldiers, dressed in red and gold tunics, with spears and swords, bows and arrows. We waited. Everyone was whispering excitedly, guessing at who it could be, and why they were coming. "Maybe there's a war," said Frederick, "and they need soldiers." "Maybe we haven't been sending enough gold for the king's liking," said a woman, which I thought was probably closer to the truth. The procession finally reached the village. A soldier lifted a golden horn to his mouth and blew 3 high notes. Pixies fluttered all around the horn. "Announcing His Royal Majesty King Bartholomew Archibald Reginald Fife." And the villagers gasped in unison. Everyone whispered to each other. Never before had a king come to visit the mountain. Everyone hushed as the soldiers parted and the king came forward. My entire life, whenever I heard mention of his name, King Bartholomew Archibald Reginald Fife, I imagined someone very big and very handsome and very brainy. I think everybody did. But now that I saw him, King Barf almost seemed more fitting. If I had just looked at his royal costume, I suppose I could have been impressed, though gold wasn't so impressive to me anymore. King Barf wore a gold crown on his head, gold chains around his neck, gold armor on his chest, gold rings on all his fingers. His saddle was gilded gold. His boots had gold buckles. I imagined if I could see beneath his horse's hooves, the horseshoes would also be gold. Gold, gold, gleaming gold. There were servants on all sides of the king with giant paddles, and they swatted at the pixies, trying to converge on the king and all his glorious gold. But King Bartholomew Archibald Reginald Fife, King Barf was chubby. He had a turned-up nose and floppy ears. He looked like a pink pig with a crown on his head. "My people of the mountain," he said, double chins wobbling. He sounded like a pig with a stuffy nose. "Your work is valuable to the kingdom. I have traveled here personally to your village because a curiosity has come to my attention." King Barf pulled something from his saddlebag, and the blood drained from my face. He held up a single spool of thread, gold threads, perfectly coiled. My gold. "For several years now, I have received little gold for your tax. I am a generous king, and I have sustained you. Yet lo and behold, I find this gold brought to me by one of my own advisors. Fine gold, fine workmanship. And yet no one in the kingdom seems to know where it came from. My gold, the miller. When I traded it, I didn't think about what he would do with it, where it would end up. But how could I have not seen this? Of course he would trade the gold in the kingdom, and the king loved gold, as he did. Would get his hands on it eventually, and then, of course, he would wonder. It wasn't normal gold dug out of the mountain in clumps and pebbles mixed with dirt. No craftsman could have molded the gold into such fine threads. This was gold only I could spin. King Barf's piggy eyes turned cold and suspicious. My soldiers will search through your homes and your minds to be sure that you are not robbing me of my rights to the gold in my kingdom. If I find you are deceiving me, stealing from me," he squeezed the gold tight in his hand. He didn't crush it or make it disappear, but we understood. A murmur went through the crowd until the soldier blew his horn again. "All citizens of the mountain will go to their homes and await inspection." Everyone hustled and bustled against one another, all moving in different directions. I stood still. I could feel Red staring at me. Finally, I looked at her. And for the first time since we had worked side by side in the sluices, Red hit me. She slapped me right over the head and said, "You really are a numbskull," and trudged off. Was there any point in arguing? I was doomed. There was gold lying in tangles on my floor, as if it were nothing but straw. I hadn't even bothered to hide it. And what about the miller? Did he still have gold sitting in his house? Surely he had hidden it well, or he was making some kind of plan. I could hide mine too, in the woods, maybe near Red's hollow beehive log. I didn't care about gold, but I didn't want to go to the dungeons for the rest of my life, or sit in the stocks so people could throw mud and rotten food at me. I raced home. I gathered all the skeins and tangles and bits of gold I could find, wrapped them in a rag, and ran out the back door. A few pixies were outside, flittering over, and started sniffing and chattering around the bundle. "Don't swat them, don't cause commotion. If I let them be, then no one will notice." I crept through the trees and huddled behind rocks, away from the roads and paths, where soldiers were going in and out of houses. The gnomes were running around madly with messages from soldiers to the king. Only gnomes have a hard time with longer names and messages, so King Barf's name always came out a little garbled. Message for King Barf Ahue Archibaldi Reginaldi Fife. No gold here, no gold here, no gold, no gold, no gold. I walked slowly. I was so small no one would notice me, as long as I didn't panic. I passed the village square and approached the mill where the miller stood outside with his 9 sons and Opal. 3 soldiers were about to go inside, but the miller didn't look nervous. Maybe he'd already traded all the gold. But when he caught sight of me creeping toward the trees with my suspicious little bundle, his eyes went wide with horror. I shook my head and tried to point in the direction of the woods. I could slip by if he kept the soldiers' attention. They wouldn't notice me. But the pixies noticed me. All the gold in my bundle was just too much to hide from them. They flew into me one by one, and the sound grew. It started as soft twitter, like the distant chirping of birds, and then built to a high, steady hum. Then there was silence. It was the kind of silence that lasts only a moment or two, but feels like 100 hours because you're just waiting for something awful to happen. I remember when I had this idea that I could fly. I built myself wings out of sticks and chicken feathers, and I climbed a high rock and I jumped. I didn't fly. I broke my arm. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was just the moment before, when I went from exhilaration of soaring through the air to the horror of plummeting toward the earth. I knew that I was going to hit the ground and feel pain. This was like that moment, the moment before everything went bad. When the pixies attacked, I flung my arms up and swatted at them. I swung my bundle of gold. I clawed at the ground, flinging mud and dirt and snow in all directions. Finally, the pixies were gone and everything was quiet again, even quieter than before. I took stock of myself. I still had my bundle of gold tight in my hand. I turned around. The miller and his 9 ugly sons and his 1 pretty daughter and the 3 soldiers all stared at me. And then at something on the ground. I followed their eyes and my stomach twisted. On the ground was a spool of gold, unraveling toward the soldiers. The spool rolled again and again, and my life unraveled before my eyes. 1 roll for every year. I snatched at the gold, clutched it to my chest, and then I turned around and ran for the woods. I don't know why I thought I could run, but I was going to until a giant horse blocked my path, and there were shiny black boots right in my face. Boots with giant gold buckles. King Barf looked down at me, and his piggy eyes narrowed on the gold I still clutched in my hands. He sniffed, as if he could smell the rest of the gold in my bundle. "Well, well," he said, "the pixies seem to find you even more enchanting than they do me. How fascinating." All right, scholars, so that's where we're going to stop today. I wonder how Rump is going to get out of this situation. Our next chapter is chapter 12, and it's titled The Miller's Lie. I hope you all have an amazing weekend, and I'll come back to you on Monday with chapter 12 and maybe chapter 13. Have an awesome weekend. I'll see you Monday. Bye, scholars.